Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's event. My name is Claire Byrne. I'm the Community Manager for RSA US. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of Chris Forman, who is our network lead here today with us and the US team, I'd like to thank you all for joining today's event, Gateway to Real Democracy. So before we get started, I'd like to cover a little bit of a background on the RSA US, and I've already gone over some of the kind of ground rules for today's event, so I won't harp on about them too much. But for those of you who are not familiar with the RSA, we were founded in the UK. We are the Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. So today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organization. We're committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. So our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas, platforms, and unique global network of about 30,000 fellows globally, change makers, work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of the 30,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work here in the United States, including our very own Chris Forman, who's here with us today, who is the Deliberation Gateway Network lead. The RSA exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the US with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to our moderator, Chris, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce him and give you a little bit of a background on who Chris is. So professionally, which says a lot because Chris wears many hats, but professionally, Chris is a research scientist in biophysics. He has previously worked at Cambridge University in the UK and Northwestern University here in the US. Currently works as an industrial scientist at TOSA, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Biosciences in Pennsylvania. He is the author of the 2021 book, Brave Green World, and his main driving influence in the transition to a regenerative economy in which local citizens' assemblies around the world will play a major role to help communities tackle local complexity and organize in the face of major challenges over the next 2 decades. He became a fellow of the RSA, mostly to set up the Deliberation Gateway Network, and saw a need and an appetite there for that topic, and has been its coordinator since its inception in 2018. He's also the chair of the Education Working Group at Democracy Without Elections, and recently trained as a Bravers Angel Ambassador for the Southeastern Pennsylvania Bravers Angels Alliance. I told you he wears many hats, so we are so delighted to have him here with us today. So over to you, Chris, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Claire. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. I'm just going to show you a few slides. What I want to talk about briefly, very briefly, before introducing our main speakers and then opening up to a much more general informal chat, is I want to talk about how I see the Deliberation Gateway fitting into the global picture of what is happening in the world today. And I'm going to do a very, very, very light, quick introduction to deliberative democracy so people know a tiny little bit about it and we're on the same page. So the Deliberation Gateway was founded to help fellows in that network who have an interest in deliberation gather and to swap stories and to learn more about it. And it began with a series of online conversations about deliberation, and it sort of fizzled out for a little bit for a year or two, but now we're rebooting it with a much deeper purpose because things have evolved in the last couple of years. And we see it as a tool to help find opportunities for formal citizens' assemblies across the US. And I use the phrase citizens' assemblies very generically in that case. Could be any kind of assembly, really. So where do we fit in the big picture? Now, I want to think about, I think there's a consensus emerging around the world that we need to build a steady state global economy that's in balance with nature. And my simple analogy for this is super simple. It's like, imagine a bathtub where you're pouring water in and you take the plug out and the water leaves. There'll be a certain level of water in the bathtub, but that vortex will pop up. And that vortex is an emergent structure. And I think we need to build institutions like science, technology, businesses, the living world itself, political frameworks, which give rise to this regenerative world as an emergent property, just like that vortex popping up. That's what we're looking for here, is a world which kind of continuously rebuilds itself and rebalances itself over time. And to do that, we've got to get people in all walks of life everywhere, from indigenous populations, farmers, academics, scientists, everyone working together. And I think there has to be a sort of a new mindset that emerges with this kind of concept of a steady state economy in mind. And I think one way of doing that is to set up the right processes so that people have experiences that really resonate and help them see other people's points of view and help communities deal with really complex, difficult topics. And so examples, and this slide deck is by no means like exhaustive. These are just a few examples, like bioregional conferences, any kind of participatory process, citizens' assemblies. And there's loads of projects all around the world and organizations who are delivering these kinds of visions. Like there's many of them, and it's really important that there are lots of them, because we don't know which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. And diversity breeds robustness. So there's just a handful here. The Living Change is the RSA's own sort of process for delivering against complexity. And we'll be hearing from Democracy Next and Healthy Democracy today, who are global experts in setting up citizens' assemblies and running them. And then there are other people in the audience as well who've got expertise in that too. And what I wanted to find in this picture is where Deliberation Gateway sits. Because we've got all these people at the bottom, all the different kinds of people all around the world in every geography and every sector who are sort of doing business as usual. And we need to find these experiences and help them transition to this new way of thinking. And that's where Deliberation Gateway is going to be. It's where we have fellows in all branches of society. And if we can create this kind of process behind the scenes, very gentle, informal, light touch process in which people can say, hey, here's a possibility for a citizens' assembly over here. Here's a possibility for some kind of budgeting exercise over there, and connect experts, people like Linn, who's here on the call with us today, to really help channel those local processes into creation and bring those experiences to people so that we can get people used to working in really, really complex situations that will then lead to this regenerative economy. So that's how I see we're playing a very important but lightweight, behind the scenes kind of role. And that's, I think, what the RSA excels at. So super quickly, what is deliberation? It's informed, productive interaction among people who have diverse perspectives. And it's a way in which a community can make a judgment. It's a way in which a community can organize to solve a common problem. And it contrasts with the sort of adversarial politics where there's always a winner and a loser, and that creates polarization. So it's a very different style of making decisions that leads to, hopefully, wiser judgments. And it's a shift from the zero-sum game based on a limited set of options to a deeper understanding of the common good. And you could think about three types of outcomes. A minimal one is one in which people begin to sort of see other people have points of view that are worth looking at. And then an intermediate point of view is this personal sense of becoming, in which people really begin to value that other people have points of view because it helps inform their own point of view. And then the final ideal outcome would be this sort of goal I was talking about an emergent world in which we have this group becoming, in which everybody begins to understand this really important role that they're playing, and no one person can possibly see or understand all of the complexity in the world. But nonetheless, we trust that we've built the right processes to keep that regenerative world going. So that brings me to the end of my sort of light introduction. So what we'd like to talk about today is like how to go about setting up, how a fellow could go about setting up the citizens' assemblies. And we're going to hear from three people. Rahmin Sarabi, who's the US lead for Democracy Next, and he's going to give us a little bit of a global overview. Then we'll hear from Linn Davis of Healthy Democracy, and he's going to give us an example of a US citizens' assembly that actually took place. And then sadly, Phil couldn't join us, but he's given me a video to play. And it's all about local training and how people can go about learning how to put on citizens' assemblies. So you can see what we're doing, going from that really big picture down to what a fellow could actually do in their immediate environment to start setting one of these things up. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to Rahmin. Rahmin is the new US lead for Democracy Next, which is this global organization. So Rahmin, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us, just segue into your slides in your own time? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see, I'm calling from San Francisco, California, and my background is in social entrepreneurship. And I guess the roots of that for me were similarly working in service of better worlds. I really love the full map you laid out, Chris. Maybe in our deepest ambitions, that is the hidden agenda, and I appreciate putting that out there. But somewhere 5 years ago, I came to find that the systems that really needed the most help in terms of innovation weren't ones that you could approach through business, that we had to go deeper in the stack to look at what we might call governance. Generally a boring sounding word, but I think deeply exciting at this moment that we're in, when we might translate that into how we do good sense making, choice creation, and then decision making, i.e. where do we want to go as a society? With that as a backdrop, I will share a bit about Democracy Next and that work. Give me one moment as I cue up the slides. So, we're framing this as new deliberative institutions. We think of a lot of our work through the lens of new institutions. Let me get this out of the way. And if I hit play, come on, there we go. Okay, I think we're all together now. This isn't about one-offs, and frankly, we can consider that there have been many one-offs. Well, I'll get to the evidence base, but quickly about Democracy Next, we really have three core beliefs. They're centered around giving people agency and dignity through participation, distributing equal power through by lottery, and as we were starting to suggest, all in service of channeling collective wisdom, so we can find common ground and move forward together. Chris shared a little bit. Have you frozen? Have I frozen on you all?
You froze a little bit, but
anyone hear me?
back now.
My back.
Yeah, you froze a bit there. You're back. Okay.
I'll try and jump back in. So Chris introduced us a bit to citizens' assemblies and juries, but if we were going to put it in one statement, we'd say, hey, it's a group of community members that are selective of a whole of a larger community, and then they're given enough space and time to make sense of this issue, find common ground, and then guide policymakers, decision makers, or the community. Well, I'm actually going to skip this. We just talked that through in a sense. And we have a slide in case anyone. The thing that I really wanted to share to this audience is at this point, we now have, through some of the founding team members at Democracy Next previous work at the OECD, a robust evidence base of over 600 cases demonstrated processes that were commissioned by public authorities. These weren't one-off processes that happened in any way independent of political processes, but that took on, again, intractable issues that the existing paradigm couldn't make heads or tails of because of some of the structural dynamics of electoral politics. What you're seeing in this graph is literally just the incidents. Some refer to this as the deliberative wave. We can see the momentum that's happening. And here we're seeing the host of issues that have been taken on using these methods, using this approach, from urban planning to health to environment, proxy for many of the climate issues I think Chris was pointing to, really to anything that has complex trade-offs, oftentimes has a long-term nature to it, and maybe is divisive and intractable given the current politics of the day.
Rahmin, can
yes,
I make
yes.
Sorry, your slides on my screen haven't been advancing. Can I
Oh no.
Can I suggest you turn your camera off and then just
Thank you.
Just manually click on the slide that you were showing, because we're seeing your sort of presenter view. So if you do, just click on the slide.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is my first time presenting Keynote and Zoom at the same time. So
okay. No worries.
thank you for stopping me. I had beautiful slides, I promise, that we're moving through. So these are probably the key visuals. Again, if we wanted to look across those 600 cases, you can see the incidence, this deliberative wave that is building. And these are all commissioned by existing government bodies that are recognizing the value and the need for a new way to do this sense making and problem solving. And again, this was showing the range of issues that have been addressed. And to ground this, in, I think one of the more powerful stories, and actually an example of institutionalization, is the Irish case. Really coming out of the 2009 financial crisis, there was also a crisis in the faith in their democratic process. What that led to was a host of different parties getting behind the commissioning of assemblies that were given really easy issues to start with: same-sex marriage and abortion, both constitutionally prohibited, and you can imagine in a Catholic country, very difficult to touch with electoral politics. The Cliff Notes is, by every host of measures and anecdotal reports, this depolarized these issues and helped find this sort of common ground in the nuances, but our society move forward. Eventually, there were, again, constitutional amendments passed through referendums based on the recommendations of the Citizen Assembly. In terms of institutionalization, again, if we're building this as a new muscle, a new capacity for governance, the Ostbelgian model, which has inspired what's now happening in the city of Paris, and also as a standing assembly on climate issues in particular in Belgium, is demonstrated here. And what might that look like? Well, again, instead of an assembly being spooled up to address one issue, you now have a standing citizen body that is playing an agenda setting role, saying, helping identify the issues that matter most for additional assemblies or panels to tackle. An example really just meant to whet our creativity as we look forward into how we can integrate this work here in the US and more around the world. I will stop there. I hope some of this came through. I apologize. I'm actually giving you this in the parking lot of San Francisco General Hospital. My wife is all right, but I had to bring her into the urgent care anyway. If you need a doctor in the US last minute, sometimes you end up in urgent care. I'll say maybe it's another issue we should address. I'll stop there. Thank you for having me.
Rahmin, thank you so much. And we appreciate your dedication to the cause. For you're in the middle of an emergency, you could have just told us. It would have been okay. But thank you so much, Rahmin. Yeah, so that's given us a nice sort of 10,000-foot view of, some processes that are happening around the world, and with this idea that perhaps we could institutionalize something. But there are many other models to think about. The concept of an institutionalized deliberative body in the US seems like a pipe dream, or does it? Do we have a process that we could do that? Linn, would you like to tell us a little bit about healthy democracy? And you're muted. Yep.
Am I back? Okay, fantastic. I would love to. Yes, fantastic. Let me just get my slides pulled up here. Hi, everyone. By the way, my name is Linn Davis. I'm a program co-director at Healthy Democracy, one of the leading organizations in the United States, practitioner and advocate organization related to lottery-selected assemblies. And my program co-director, Alex, is also here, although she had to step off into a different call in just a moment. And okay, I think almost ready. I'm going to tell you about one example, just one project that we did last year in the town of Petaluma, California. It's a town of 60,000 people in Northern California in wine country, about an hour north of San Francisco. We're based in Oregon, but we work all over the US. And this was related to a situation, a very traditional land use sort of question, about as textbook an urban planning question as you can get. The project was called the Petaluma Fairgrounds Advisory Panel. And it related to the future of a 55-acre fairgrounds property that was owned by the city, is owned by the city, and had been leased to a fair organization, a state organization, for about $1 a year for many, many decades. The current 50-year lease is expiring later this year, and this was easily the most contentious issue in town. Seemingly everybody is a stakeholder. This land was very sort of culturally important to the agricultural history of the town, and just sort of personally important to a lot of folks. And there were a wide variety of views here. The fair and fair supporters wanted the status quo, more or less, and to negotiate a private agreement with the city. And there was a campaign group that was quite active. The city, on the other hand, and these are kind of the two entities that were at loggerheads, wasn't unified. The views on council ranged from sympathy for the fair to proposals to level it all and replace it with a big city park, or replace it with housing, or all kinds of different proposals coming from different community members. So big contentious issue, very place-based kind of planning problem. A perfect opportunity for a citizen assembly to draw out voices that weren't currently involved, because although everybody was a stakeholder, there was actually quite limited involvement in participation in this issue. That these two entities were kind of sucking all the air out of the room, had been fighting with each other for a few years, and it seemed like we're going to kind of make the decision themselves in the absence of some other kind of process. With some kind of perfunctory public engagement that is typical to these kind of processes. Just a little bit on the timeline of this process, and I think this is fairly typical for an assembly on a single issue. As Rahmin mentioned, there are some really exciting permanent established bodies being created in other parts of the world, but the vast majority of lottery-based democracy anywhere in the last 50 years has been these one-off assemblies on a specific topic with a specific framing question, typically tied to a government agency, although sometimes privately convened. So this is sort of the most typical form of an assembly, although it was also quite an extensive one. It had a lot of sort of extra bells and whistles that I can get into if folks are curious about the process itself, the selection, and so forth. But just the basic overview here. It started, went over the course of about a year, starting in October through the end of 2021 into 2022 was sort of preparation, early high-level process design, and there was sort of a point at which the city council had to authorize the project and authorize the spending of in this case, quite a large sum of money, $450,000 on the project. Then there was a period of where two things were sort of happening simultaneously, actually a lot more behind the scenes, a lot of process design and recruitment of moderators and et cetera, happening behind the scenes, but sort of front of house, the two things that were happening were a stakeholder committee that curated introductory information for the panel, and then a panelist selection process. In this case, 10,000 mailers that went out to randomly selected residential addresses. Folks responded, and then there was a lottery event that we live streamed where a panel was selected according to certain demographics determined in advance, mostly according to the census. Then the panel process ran for about 2 months over the course of 5 long weekends, more or less. Went through these sort of typical phases, a really robust information gathering phase. Panel heard from about 40 different folks in this case. That is higher than average by a lot, I think. Well, somewhat higher than average, but typically there is a very robust information gathering phase to any of these assemblies. Then moving into a typical kind of planning process, values and principles first, and a report prioritizing different principles, editing those. The panel doing all of its own editing is a core feature of that contributes to the credibility and integrity of these processes. Then the panel put together a list of sort of different options, specific site use options for that site, and then put together these sort of cohesive recommendations that combine those two things and delivered that to council along with those 2 previous reports. And then importantly, was also funded as part of the project to continue to lobby for its own recommendations, engage with the community, and do additional process design itself. They ended up doing a design charrette, or sort of a very short kind of charrette-ish process where they worked with local architects to actually envision some of their designs, which is a thing that wasn't that had to be cut actually from the original process due to COVID, a COVID outbreak in the middle of the process. Little extra challenge in our day and age. But enabled the panel to really design that themselves, actually using that extra money at the end and present to council again. So that's kind of the brief overview of the process. The results that we've seen so far, most importantly, a clear change in tone. These processes are often used, as Rahmin said, in highly divisive kind of situations, often very complex, technical, but also very divisive. And this met all of those qualifications. But the change in tone between the January and February meetings and the later meeting, so all open to the public with lots of public comment in council in October, was drastic. The level of tension had clearly cooled, and there was a high degree of respect from both sides for the panel's work. It's hard to criticize a group of everyday people selected at random. That's one of its great benefits. And most importantly, respect from the public, it seemed, and both sides. I think one counselor said, "This is a new day for democracy in Petaluma." Clip that. Of course, there were certain policy outcomes, 3 high-quality, cohesive visions for the site, prioritized with all their elements, ranked as far as their support from the panel, and visualizations, as I mentioned. In addition, a number of clear planning recommendations came out of the panel, sort of on the side of these general visions. Key elements that the panel believes should be on the site, and others that it should not. So some very specific kind of recommendations. But we will learn over the next couple of years exactly what impacts the panel's recommendations have. That's always a question. Any of these processes, the typical baseline, and our baseline requirement is that a council, in this case, guarantees upfront that they will provide some sort of official response to the panel's recommendations as to why or why not they are following them, as a minimum sort of response. And because this is a long-term planning project, this was and it's going to happen over a couple of years. Still, we don't know exactly what the impact is as far as do they follow any of the recommendations built into these visions. But in any case, that's an overview of this project, and happy to take questions about it later.
Thanks, Lynn. That's awesome. That's perfect. And that gives us an example of what's possible to achieve here in the US. And I know that there's plenty of other examples as well from other people. And we'll have a chance to get into those. And then finally, just to get into, before we get into discussion, I just want to share a quick video from Phil Lindsay, who's at the Hannah Arendt Center, who's set up an interesting, potentially training program in New York. So in fact, I forgot to click the button, excuse me. I'll do that again. No, good.
Always the joys of technology, right?
I know.
Something always goes wrong when you want it to go right.
Got it. Okay, here we go. So here's
Phil. Hey everyone, my name is Philip Lindsay, and I lead our deliberative democracy programs at the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities, which is located at Bard College, just a few hours north of New York City in the Hudson Valley. And I'm really sad I couldn't join you tonight. I was looking forward to it, and I'm sure I'm missing out on some new connections and interesting conversation. But we'll hope to connect with you after this. So I lead our Democracy Innovation Hub, which is really a home for the 2 major programs that we run at the Arendt Center. One program is an annual workshop. We did our first last year. Rahmin can tell you more about it. He was a central pillar in making that a success. And this 2-day workshop was based off of a model that we imported from the G1000 in Europe. That organization had this model for a 2-day convening for policymakers. So we took that and we adapted it to the US. We did that last summer. And the idea was to build connections within the ecosystem of deliberative democracy, and also give policymakers, staffers, public servants and community advocates Citizens Assemblies 101, and then access to an alumni network. And so we're going to do another one of those this year. It was very successful, specifically in building out that ecosystem of both practitioners, connecting practitioners with elected officials, connecting community members with each other, community members to elected officials, who to see who's interested in pursuing an assembly, and coming out of that, we've had a couple of experiments and experiences. One in New York City, both at the city council level, which is 150 to 200,000 people, and then the citywide level, several million people, participated in really, at the end of the day, it was 6 or 7 deliberative committees that were based off the Citizens Assemblies model, and mixed that model with the participatory budgeting model that the city was implementing. So I'm kind of scrolling through here. This is from the March newsletter, the Civic Engagement Commission in New York City, showing that. So there were a few other working groups that came out of that workshop, and so one thing we're really focused on are these in-person convenings paired with alumni networks and online resources for folks to really get involved. So look forward to connecting with you if you or someone is a policymaker or a power player, someone who's connected to a decision maker that might want to attend our 2023 workshop. Please reach out to me. That information will be uploaded to our website soon. So that's the first major program we have, is this workshop for specifically public servants, elected officials, but also key community advocates and deliberative democracy advocates. And then let's see, Chris can speak more to this program, which is our teacher training program. And this is the first time we're going to run this, and I'm really excited about this, because it's if we're not involving young people, teaching them about these models, involving them in thinking through how to improve upon the models and getting them excited about democracy, what's the point? That's one of the core things we can core places we can intervene to bring hope and a sense of collaboration and innovation into our democratic, our public sphere. And so this course, we're actually just next Monday, we're gonna have an online webinar, and Chris can speak more to that. Dr. Michael McKenzie from UPitt is teaching that course, and you can actually see a video of him speaking on our Democracy Innovation Hub. We have a short course that's all online. If you want to have a deeper dive into all this, there's an online course that we call the Sortition Academy that has 13 different short videos from experts all around the world, practitioners, activists, professors, who speaking from their lens about deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies. So that teacher training program is coming up in May. The policymaker workshop and public servant, the broader workshop, is going to be in August or September. And there's so many different doors and alleyways to explore. And as I'm not in person, I'm not 100% sure, what questions you're going to ask me, and I can't answer them. But the last thing I would leave you all with is that the Hannah Arendt Center is part of an Open Society University Network, which is a worldwide network of over 40, 50 universities, colleges, institutes around the world. And you might be a part of one of these institutes. So I encourage you to go to this Open Society University Network.org/about/members, this page, and see if you happen to be affiliated, or someone who's interested in deliberative democracy and is connected to one of these institutes. Why do I say that? Well, the Hannah Arendt Center is part of this network, and this is sort of an intra-university network. So if you happen to be affiliated or an alumni to one of these organizations, and you're working in deliberative democracy, and you want to work with the Hannah Arendt Center, this network makes it a lot easier for us to apply for funding, collaborate, possibly teach a course together. So that's about it from my end.
Over to you, Chris. I think you're.
Yeah, no, I got it. Okay, thank you so much, Phil. And I did did I see that Phil has actually joined us? Thanks for coming, Phil.
I was able to just call in, so that was
Okay.
awkward. Yeah,
Okay, great. You can just answer some questions. So what I'd like to do now, in the last 20 minutes, I was hoping to have a little bit longer, but that's cool. 20 minutes. We want to hear from everyone else. Thoughts, questions. Like the main sort of topic I really want to sort of talk about, very, informally, lightly, whatever, is to think about ways in which the Fellows Network can find citizen assembly opportunities in all of their different forms. So if anyone has got anything that they want to say, please put your hand up, and we will, invite you to speak. So to start with, does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers about any aspect of what they've talked about? Anyone interested? Have that little moment.
And folks can also ask in the chat as well if
Yeah.
they don't want to come off camera or anything.
Yeah. I'd like to ask, have any of the people here actually had experience in setting up a citizens assembly or something like it, charrette or anything in the US here? Does anyone would they like to comment on how hard they found it, or difficult, what the barriers were to progress, that kind of thing? And obviously, just because you're not in the US, you can comment on, say, in the UK as well. That's absolutely fine. Actually, yeah.
I see that just Stephen popped in the chat there if you want to check that out. Sure.
Yeah. Does anyone know how long that actually took to set up the Irish Assembly? Because that was quite a long process. And one of the things that struck me from Linn's talk was, how complicated it can be. Yeah. Well, when I say the setup, I mean, yeah, the genesis, like the process before it actually happened, all the politics that took place. I believe it was quite complicated. Does anyone actually know anything about that specifically? I don't know enough to comment on it.
Feel free to come off mute there, Stephen, if you have some thoughts you'd like to share.
Yeah.
EU membership and the sea change in Ireland. I think, yeah, just like how long it took from the deliberation through to actually seeing the results and the economic change and recommendations for a referendum amendment. So.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. So, all right. I mean, I would like to know, I'm thinking, Linn, I'm actually kind of focusing on you for a second. Is there anything that you would say that fellows need to bear in mind if they wanted to set up a citizens assembly? What kind of the basic steps that they have to go through before they can say, come to someone like yourself who would then put on a citizens assembly in the US?
Yeah, so no real steps are necessary before contacting somebody like us. We're happy to help out. We just ran a training for advocates, and we can supply you with innumerable materials, slides and pamphlets and so forth, all that kind of stuff. If you're talking to folks on, in a municipal staff or at a state agency or an elected official. So no barrier whatsoever, and Rahmin and others here in the US are also able to provide some of those things too, I think. There are a lot of things that need to happen sort of even before that timeline started, including sort of understanding what the political situation is. Some of the first questions that we ask are, is this a good topic for an assembly? And good topics are ones where there isn't a decision already made. Maybe that goes without saying, but a lot of times we're confronted with situations where it's already where the assembly is maybe being used or attempted to be used as kind of a campaign tool of some kind for someone's pet project or something like that. That's not a good use. Nobody is gonna go for that kind of project. But a legitimate kind of curiosity on the part of public officials around a particular question, or something outside of government, a process in some cases where it may be appropriate to privately fund a project outside of government. Of course, funding is another big question. These processes don't have to cost $450,000, but they do cost something like $150K and up. So it is a substantial amount of money. Now, there is also a possibility that there could be private funding coupled with public funding. That's happened in the case here in Oregon. It was a third funded by the city, a third funded by a state grant, and a third funded by private foundations. But that is a question. So that's typically why, in most cases, these processes are first used for issues where there's some kind of lose-lose situation at play, where there's some kind of people at some kind of crossroads where typical public engagement is not going to suffice or is going to result in a lot of angry meetings that nobody wants. There's some kind of impetus that's good both from the perspective of finding the cash and the willingness to do it, and also from the perspective of the panel's eventual recommendations being taken seriously, because of course they're going to be taken most seriously in cases where they're really, really needed and wanted. So finding that kind of situation, sort of the situation being a big part, and the champion in government or multiple champions in government going up the chain, a planning director, ideally a city manager, one council member, something like that, who's going to kind of help to be a contact and carry the process forward. Those are kind of the two key elements at the start.
And that's cool. Thanks for that. So yeah, two key things there: having a champion and that it's a real problem. And John asks in the chat, are assemblies usually broadcast to the communities, or are most of the proceedings in person only?
They're typically in most cases, they are live streamed. All of our processes are live streamed, but they generally happen in person, although the last one we did was a little bit hybrid out of necessity, and the previous ones during COVID were all online.
Right, okay. And Maria made a comment in the chat that she's participated in town halls. And Maria, where are you based? Are you in the US or are you in somewhere else?
Yes, I'm based in the US. Hi.
Hi, whereabouts in the US?
New Jersey.
New Jersey, cool. And so these town hall... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So these town halls that you went to, so were they really deliberative issues, or, I mean, how were they? Would you like to describe them a little bit and what happened in them?
Well, these town halls were, for example, we have pressing issues in a community, and those are local issues. It could be around, for example, a town hall about curriculum in books, or it could be about, for example, we had a town hall about aggregated energy in my town. So we meet as a community and we invite elected officials. They might appear or they might not, but then we inform the community about the issue that is happening. And we have a location. Other town halls are a little bit more, we show up to the office of the elected official. And it happens in the parking lot, or it happens.
That's cool.
To make them aware that we care. There's an issue that we want them to pay attention to. But they're usually local issues.
So this is, would you say this was like more like a group of concerned citizens coming together? Was there like a lottery process involved to tap into other citizens who weren't necessarily in that group, or not?
Yes, citizens coming together. That's how NJ11 was born, organized. NJ11, it was through town halls.
Yeah.
And they changed. They changed the Congress person. Now we have a woman in Congress as a result of those town halls, because the previous Congress person wasn't too responsive.
That's cool.
But it took, yeah.
That's cool, because that's a different, I mean, that's a different kind of process, isn't it? Where you have I imagine a lot of fellows are in similar kind of camps where they've got a particular issue that they're interested in promoting or moving forward on. And sometimes it can be hard to, you know, get traction on that. But if you can somehow, it depends on the nature of the issue, but if there was a way in which you could build citizens assemblies or a participatory process around that, you know, then it could be easier. Then, you know, and I think that's what Linn was saying. If you get like that champion from the council on board first, then you can really build in a process that leads to change. But obviously, you know, every situation's different, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for
mean,
listening. Okay.
yeah, no worries. I mean, it's an interesting case study, like comparing yours to the Petaluma, very different processes, but you know, this is, I think, what I'm trying to get at here is the flavor of the things that are experienced by fellows and how.
For example,
yeah,
we might be from different organizations that we do not agree in all the issues, but there's one issue that will come together.
Yeah.
And then and for that issue we all meet. It's about more about morality and than about political party, what is right or wrong. So that's the approach that we use.
That's cool. That's cool. Cool. Thanks. Well, thanks for contributing there. That's awesome. Okay, I'm just working my way down the chats here. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. The Participedia from Nivek is an awesome resource if people haven't come across that. It's a list of case studies of various participatory processes. So yeah, if you've got one, write them up and look at the others. That's a really good place to start doing a bit of research. Does someone want to say something?
Oh, I was just saying that I saw Anna raise her hand and I was just letting you know, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Anna, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I'm not so much now, but I have been involved in setting up these sort of interventions for people and with people. And the thing I remember most is some of them were to pass on information and share information. And I think the more substantive ones were where change was actually happening. And both, I was working mainly in healthcare and social care to bring those, and with some colleagues who are more expert than I am. And the NHS in England, it's a bit of a mess at the minute, which is an understatement, but it has a long history of bringing in structures to include people both in the strategic and the operational level that may be looking at. And what we used to find, well, what I found useful then and now it's some of the work I'm doing is to think of Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, which is she wrote that paper I think in '69, and I've always found it useful when I'm thinking of democracy as participatory democracy you're talking about, to say at what level is this intervention coming in at? Is it at the level of people actually sharing power, or is it at the level of passing on information? That's always been helpful in my thinking around this.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. So, I mean, yeah, and that's interesting because, you know, that brings up a number of other different things that fellows may encounter because they're in vastly different contexts, not necessarily in government decision making. Like, you know, take the NHS. You know, how do participatory processes play a role in organizing? I mean, the NHS is what, 1.5 million employees. I think it's the largest single organization outside the US Army or something ridiculous like that.
Yes.
So, I mean, you know, how do you organize it? I mean, Scotland is only 5 million people, right? So it's like, how do you organize that? Is that a different kind of process to one in, you know, in a sort of civic sense?
I was involved with one of the NHS bills back in the 2000s, and the development of these involvement structures. And what it was very important to remember is one, you can put structures into any system, to include people's voices, but you have to make sure that's done equally and fairly, and you have to prepare all sides for that process. So for the people who are coming in to have their voices heard, they sometimes needed support to interact with this big machine, you know, some courage, some confidence, ways of speaking. And similarly, the people within that system and within that organization also needed to be prepared to let go of some of their privilege and power, which is often the battle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Anna, for commenting that. Yeah, right.
I see that EPG. Sorry, that's the only name I can see there is raised their hand.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, sorry, yes, I'm Elliot here. I'm calling in from Sydney, which is why it's so bright here. Hello. So just a few thoughts. One thing is I'm a soft matter scientist as well, Chris, so I probably need to look at what research you're doing. The RSA in Australia and New Zealand actually had a program, I think either last year or the year before that, on deliberative democracy. I was interested to see that in the video that was displayed, there was some reference to deliberative democracy in the Australian context, which I actually thought we don't do too much of here. I know there are some things done at the in the state of Victoria at the council level. I think the biggest thing that's happening in deliberative democracy now, and I don't know if the people in this forum are aware of it, that we're going through a process where we're looking to change the Australian constitution through a referendum to give Indigenous people a say in the policies and legislation that's going to affect them. So this is going to be a really massive change for us, and I think that vote is, they haven't called a date for the referendum yet, but we believe it's going to be sometime this year. I did want to ask a question to Linn, which was around the way the lottery system worked in terms of the representation, and he referred to the census. So do I understand that when people kind of put their names in for a lottery, it was done based upon their age, their ethnicity, and so on, and then you kind of compare that to the breakdown in the census, and then okay, that's a very, very good way of doing it. Yes. And is that fairly typical for the way these deliberative democracy panels are set up?
Yes, we because there's sort of another side to the word deliberation here in the United States that doesn't involve lotteries. Abroad, at least in Europe, our understanding is that the word deliberation is kind of being used to include always things that are lottery selected through this democratic lottery process. Here in the US, that's not always true. So we always say sort of lottery selected panel or something really, cumbersome like that in order to specify. But yes, in general, it's what's called a two-stage lottery, a representative random sample in scientific terms that defines a population, and then a very, very simple sort of questionnaire on the introductory letter that says, hey, you'll be paid this much. These are the dates. Here's some information and FAQs about it. And please fill out this very simple form that says your basic info according those categories that we're going to compare to, self-reporting, and a confirmation that you're not a current city official usually or something like that, and a signature, and that's it. And then the lottery does the rest of it. You can in fact play around if you want to be really play around with how this works. There's a great tool online called Panelot, Panelot, haha, like Camelot. And it's a group of researchers from a number of, exactly. There's a number of researchers from a few different US universities who have written a paper that came out in Nature a couple of years ago. It's way beyond me, but there's a whole science to doing this as fairly as possible so that people have the most chance possible, and the most equal chance possible, I should say, to being selected within that lottery. But it's an open source algorithm that does it, where and it comes out with a panel that looks demographically like the general public, but is randomly selected and doesn't have the sort of human fingerprints on it.
That's true.
Right,
and
in terms of
there's a sorry, hang on. We're a bit tight on time, but it is a whole science to picking out the lotteries. It's very complicated. I know that Nivek has got her hand put up, and I'm pretty sure I want to hear from Nivek because she's in. Sorry to cut you off there, but yeah,
no
lotteries happen, and we can talk about it separately. But Nivek knows something about Australia, so I'm sure she wants to say something, and then we'll have to round it out. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, look, I'm from Sydney as well. That isn't Sydney behind me, that's Vermont. But I just because I like the democracy jigsaw. Yeah, look, Victoria in Australia certainly is one of the states that's doing the most work in deliberative mini-publics, but it's not the only one. I actually recruit deliberative mini-publics here, and I've got a couple in New South Wales this coming year. I've done other ones in New South Wales. I've done ones in Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia. Obviously, most of my work's in Victoria, and I've done some in for the ACT. I think one of the challenges going forward, and this is probably a bit self-serving, I've just recently finished my PhD looking at how we can design deliberative mini-publics to improve the quality of democracy. Thanks, Chris. And one of the things I think is that the work of, say, the OECD and so on around the standards is a good thing, but also we need to be really thinking about designing fit for purpose for particular, and that's one of the things that deliberative, in my mind, there's so much scope to design deliberative mini-publics to be to meet the needs of a particular community. And one of the things I did in my PhD was look at this concept called democratic functions developed by Mark Warren and others, and actually then operationalize that for mini-publics to actually determine how that could give us guidance around. I used it in an evaluative way in my case studies, but it also provides us with guidance about how we can actually questions we should be asking ourselves when we're making decisions about the design. And I'll finish. See, we don't have time.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nivek. That's brilliant. I knew that you would have a different kind of point of view on what was happening in Australia, which is important. So, I mean, we're pretty much out of time there, but there's a few questions that haven't been answered. I'm sorry about that. And quick answer to John's question about can they be hyper-focused versus hyper-local? Yes, they can. You can focus them on anything you want. But I think a couple of things have come out. I just want to kind of sum up and draw this to a close, if I can, Claire, and then you can finish up. So I think it's interesting to see which questions are being asked and what the experiences are. You know, we've heard about town halls, we've heard about some questions about sortition and lotteries. We've got these ideas, PhDs. We've got a whole range of insights, and I think this is what's going to be really powerful about this Deliberation Gateway Network. It's a combination of people who are new to this but have possibilities in their camps, and people who know a lot about it and who are looking for things. So I think going forward in the Deliberation Gateway, we're going to host an event like this maybe every 3 months or something like that. And I think we can really, I would like to get a lot of ideas from people about specific topics that we could talk about. And Claire, did we set up a date for the next one or not? I can't remember if we set one up.
We didn't, but we are going to. So don't worry.
We're going to do that. So watch this space.
We are going to organize. Yeah.
And I would really ask everyone to sign up to the Deliberation Gateway mailing list. You can do that on our link. And when Claire's talking, I'll put that link. And also, just to Phil, thank you for coming and joining us. On Monday evening, there's a talk, a seminar about the teacher training conference in New York. And I'll put a link in the chat as well. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming along. I hope people learned something from this. I hope people have met some people that are new. I want this community to keep going. And I'm going to hand back to Claire to wrap up. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news when I have to wrap up an event because there's such good chats. And Nivek, I did not mean to cut you off, far from it. It was more like, we've no time for any more questions. So thank you for sharing your insights and your experience. And I hope we can have a chat at another point. But just a short message to say thank you so much for attending, for bringing your questions, your enthusiasm, and your energy to today's conversation. I will be sending a follow-up email for those of you who registered via Eventbrite. I've been capturing all the resources shared in the chat, so don't worry about remembering all of them. And I'll ping you tomorrow with also the recording of the event. And for those who are fellows within the Global Fellowship community, we can explore setting up a circle space to continue the conversation there. I think that would be really great. So thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Chris. And let's keep the conversation going and be in touch soon. So take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.